Now, the latest REACT study on the spread of COVID published this morning says much of the spread is down to younger age groups not yet vaccinated, with most cases in 5 to 12-year-olds and 18 to 24-year-olds. It comes amid continuing debate on whether children should be vaccinated or not. All over 18s should be invited for vaccination this week, and in fact the Times has just reported that it's expected that over 18s will be invited for vaccination tomorrow. The Joint Committee on Vaccination appears to be steering away from jabbing under 18s, although the medicines regulator has now approved the use of the Pfizer jab for 12 to 15-year-olds. Advice from the JCVI on that is expected soon. Meanwhile, the Deputy Director General of Israel's Health Ministry has said this morning that effective herd immunity is impossible without vaccinating children. Israel began its rollout of the Pfizer vaccine for children 2 weeks ago. Well, here to discuss the science and the moral issues around vaccinating children who are not at risk of getting seriously ill from COVID themselves, I'm joined by Professor Beate Kampmann, Director of the Vaccine Centre at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She's also a paediatrician. Also with us, Jane McLaughlin, mum of 3 in Glasgow. She wants her kids to get vaccinated. Also joining us, Dr. Renee Hunderkamp. She's a mum and a GP, and she doesn't think it's right for kids to get vaccinated. And Serge Kefai is Executive Head Teacher at St Thomas the Apostle School in Peckham and Head Teacher at Sacred Heart Academy in Brixton. Welcome, all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. Professor Kampmann, first of all, are we entering different territory when we're looking at under 18s getting vaccinated because of the fact that it's not necessarily about benefit to themselves and protection against them getting ill, it's about the greater good?
Yes, well, good afternoon, Joanna. This is clearly an important question as the transmission, particularly of the Delta variant, continues in the community. And obviously, now that the vaccines are protecting those who already had them, the proportion of those who haven't yet had them will grow, and that includes children and young people. The prioritization of the second shot at the moment, I think, overshadows the discussion around whether children should also be put forward right now. And we, as you said, we haven't yet had the recommendation of the JCVI. And I think, it isn't completely new territory because, for example, for rubella, we also vaccinate children in order to protect the pregnant women against a viral disease that could affect the fetus. So it's not uncharted territory. And it's also not entirely true that children don't suffer from COVID. We just haven't seen quite the severity of illness and as we've seen in adults. So I think children themselves will also benefit from the vaccination, but it's a toss-up between prioritization within the health service, the available safety data, and I think this is what the JCVI is currently pontificating about.
Do you believe it's right in this country that we do move on to the under 18s once the over 18s have been vaccinated?
I think once we've given 2 doses to those who are most vulnerable, and once we have some increased safety data from the rollout of teenage vaccinations in other countries, I believe that's the right thing to do, yes.
So, Jane, you do want your kids to get vaccinated. Tell us a bit more about your situation and also what your kids think about it.
I've got a 17 and a 15 and a 12-year-old. The 17-year-old has lost a lot of time at school through having to be sent home because somebody in his class has COVID symptoms. So he's missed a lot of schooling. The younger 2 haven't for some reason. And that's really affected their schooling. I'm quite happy for them to have vaccinations. They're going to have the HPV vaccination. My son had arthritis, so he's had a steroid. He's been on medication for the last 2 years. COVID is going to be with us for many, many years in whatever form. And so for that future reason, I'd be happy for them to be vaccinated.
Serge, Jane makes the point actually about disruption at school being a factor in why she and her 17-year-old would like kids to be vaccinated. How does that play for you?
Well, I think I'm glad the BBC is talking about this in a very adult way, if you like, because this is not either or. And what has to happen is to have proper conversations about what's really harmful. I think from the ethical point of view, there's no question that young teachers, young pupils, etc., they will not perhaps die from COVID. You know, we know that the cases are very, very small. And should we then send all our vaccinations abroad? Because clearly people will continue to die in the more vulnerable, poorer countries. However, what isn't being taken into account, which is why I welcome this sort of debate, is what other harm is going on in terms of children's education and well-being. I think this is something that's not being taken into account by scientists. So as a result, as I've just explained, it's easy to compare children that might not get very ill, might not even know they've had it, with other people in the world who could possibly die. As an educationist, I bring to the party, I want schools to get back to normal. Education needs to recover because we don't know, and I don't know, I'm guessing that the harm is far more than we imagine, that having any impediments on schools opening as normal is causing far more harm than we can ever imagine. So I'm afraid I'm in the camp of let's vaccinate our children, let's get back to normal, because I think there's an awful lot of stuff going on that we still don't know about in terms of the consequences of COVID. It's not just about hospitalizations and death of the vulnerable. I think our children now have to be put a little bit up the priority list because we don't know the damage that's been done, but I am quite worried about the depth of it.
So, Renee Hundekamp, you're a GP and a mum, and I know that you don't think kids should be vaccinated. How do you respond to those points that Serge was making there about getting back to normal, making our kids the priority?
Okay, so Serge makes some very valuable points and I will address them all because they are important. The first thing to say is I'm completely pro-vaccine. Vaccine is a force for good. My daughter has had every vaccine that's available, plus an extra one I paid for. She won't be having the COVID one, not yet anyway. And the reason for that is it is actually at the moment still in its experimental phase 3 trials, and children do not get sick with COVID. They do not die with COVID. We've had no deaths of a healthy under 15-year-old die in the UK. However, in both Israel and the States now, we have a lot of cases of myocarditis after the vaccine. That is inflammation of the heart. Now, the Israeli health minister said it this morning on the BBC that this is happening, but the children mainly get better, so it's okay. Well, as a mum and as a doctor, where we do no harm as our first principle in both of those scenarios, I'm afraid I'm not prepared to risk any child having inflammation of their heart, even if they get better, just because we don't know what the long-term effect of that will be. And currently in the US, and this is from the FDA, these figures can be checked out, there are still 3 kids in intensive care following myocarditis after the vaccine, the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine. So when we rolled out the AstraZeneca vaccine, we thought it was completely safe, which is great. But we then learned when we put it into lots of people that actually for some people it causes blood clots and some people have died. Now we're seeing the same when we're vaccinating kids between the ages of 12 and 15. We thought it was safe, but actually boys between those ages are getting myocarditis. So we have no long-term data, and for me as a parent and a doctor, when we're vaccinating kids who do not die of this disease, that risk is too great. The risk is greater than the benefit. And when the Israeli health minister says we can't get herd immunity without vaccines, of course we can, because we get herd immunity from 2 things. We get it from the vaccines, which have been great to protect vulnerable people, but we also get it from these kids getting COVID. And I think we need to revisit how we're treating these bubbles, these class bubbles, sending them home, even when they have negative tests, not letting them go back for 10 days, only to repeat it. So I agree with the head teacher from that perspective, but not at the expense of risking their heart.
So Beata Kampmann, how do you respond to those concerns?
Yeah, so first of all, it's not quite correct that no children have died from active acute COVID or in fact long COVID. I look after just right now after 2 children who are previously fit and well, who are now in intensive care unit in Northwest London hospitals with active COVID disease. So it's not quite as harmless as my colleague has just said. The myocarditis signal is being investigated as we speak, and much like what happened with the blood clots, the denominators and the background incidences of those occurrences are being very carefully studied, and the JCVI is very much aware of this signal, which might well be related to the vaccination. But let's just hold our horses and let them do that job properly to actually explain if anything is related there or not before we jump to conclusions. I think, the protection of the most vulnerable people with 2 doses of vaccination needs to be a priority for now, whilst we really carefully assess whether there's anything in this. And I think there needs to, as it's been done with the blood clot story, a risk-benefit ratio assessment. And we need to be very clearly aware of why we're vaccinating people. First of all, to protect the most vulnerable against severe disease, but also to have an impact on community transmission. And the fact that that's possible has already been very clearly shown within the UK through the fact that the proportion of those who are not vaccinated is now going up in the chain of transmission significantly.
Jane, do comments like we were hearing there from the doctor give you cause to pause and think again, or are you aware of all of these arguments and confident about?
I get concerned all through COVID when we're told that, when she cites that there's 3 children in America who have this heart problem. I don't want to use the word scaremongering, but these incidents, yes, they happen, but they are in the absolute minority, and we have to think of what's for the greater goods. No medicine, not even a paracetamol, is without risk. But a very small minority of people are going to have some sort of adverse effect to any medicine or any vaccine. So I don't think we should be concentrating on the very small cases and just have a look at the wider picture. I'm not saying I want to rush out and get my children vaccinated tomorrow. I'm still waiting for my second vaccine. I want everybody to have their second vaccine and then move on, and all the vulnerable children, and then move on to who are considered the healthy children. But I just think we have to have a look at these things with a bit of perspective and not listen to the very, very small cases where things have possibly gone wrong.
It's great to have you all on. We're out of time for now, but we are still awaiting the decision from the JCVI, and I'm sure it's something we'll be revisiting. So perhaps we can talk to you again when we do. But for now, thank you very much for taking the time to share your views, your perspective, your expertise with us.